Okay, you are good to go.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is 5:30 p.m., Tuesday, September 7th, and I now call to order the workshop of the City of College Place. Will the clerk please take roll call and verify that we have a quorum?
Yes. Mayor Hernandez is obviously here. Councilmember Bobbitt,
Present.
Councilmember Cleveland,
Present.
Councilmember Peterson,
Present.
Councilmember Selby,
Present.
Councilmember Sherman,
Present.
Councilmember Boyle.
Present.
We also have with us City Administrator Mike Rizzatello, Public Works Director Robert McAndrews. I almost said Paul, sorry about that. And we have a few guests with us here tonight that we will introduce as their items come up. We do have a quorum. We're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. I do not have my full agenda pulled up. Do we have a Pledge of Allegiance set to go?
Hang on just one moment.
Oh, sorry. I was just going through my notes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thanks, everybody. That was unexpected. Sorry, we kind of just went right into it. Okay, we're going to move on quickly. So we have some workshop topics this afternoon, and the first one is going to be the fiscal year 2022 legislative agenda discussions. And Mr. Rizzatello and Mr. Enslow, welcome. Thank you for being here. We'll be presenting.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. So hard to believe it's this time of year already, but it is. So this is typically the point of the year where we review what was done last legislative session and what are we trying to work towards this upcoming legislative session. So the state of Washington functions on a biennial basis, which typically means during the even numbered years, they're willing to take on a lot more encompassing policy positions or things that really affect the budget. So that's typically done on like the odd number year, which is like what we just went through. Now we're getting into 2022, the even numbered year. And with 2022, they make tweaks to the budget and things of that sort. And policy considerations that don't cause massive swings in the budget, but they try to avoid things that would cause swings in the budget, since typically with the even numbered year goes into an election year and larger policy objectives usually don't get covered in years such as that. This last session, we had quite a few successes with tax increment financing finally going somewhere and getting approved and things of that sort. But there still is work to be done. So with that, I will turn it over to our lobbyists that we share with Walla Walla County and the Port of Walla Walla through our local government consortium, who is Brian Enslow. So with that, Brian, floor is yours.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Mr. Rizzatello, I certainly appreciate it. As he mentioned, I am the contract lobbyist for the Coalition of Local Government in the Walla Walla region, which consists of the City of College Place, the Port of Walla Walla, and Walla Walla County. And I have been for, I believe, approximately, we're going on 5 years, I think. As Mr. Rizzatello mentioned, I think we had, given a lot of things considered, a pretty successful session last year. I have a presentation here that I will go through here just momentarily and get it loaded up for you. And then we can also perhaps talk a little bit about what we think is something we'll push, the types of things we'll push for next year, and maybe some of the context. So give me a moment here. Thank you very much for your patience on that. I'm going to move some of your wonderful shiny faces just out of the way a little bit. All right. So as Mike mentioned, one of the biggest accomplishments from last year was the passage of House Bill 1189, which was the tax increment financing bill. That is something that I have been working on at least since my the start of my career as a lobbyist, working for the Association of Counties in 2012, so at least 10 years now. I know many other people have been working on that for even longer. It's as it turns out, we were the last state in the nation to adopt tax increment financing. For those of you that aren't necessarily familiar, basically it's a financing tool where you capture future increases in in property tax collections to fund infrastructure improvement. So for instance, if you have a bare plot of land, it has an assessed value of very little, and then you build some pumps and pipes, and you can put a $50 million capital facility there, then there's a lot of revenue. So that's generally the concept behind how you use tax increment financing. You're generating a revenue stream used to finance infrastructure projects to support economic development, and you're paying it back based on that increase in property tax collection. You have the opportunity to designate two different areas. You're capped out at a maximum assessed value within those areas is 200 million, which I don't think is a problem for the city of College Place. And I believe as you move forward with those deliberations, Mr. Rizzatello will keep you very informed on kind of the wheres, whys, and hows of how that moves forward. But it is going to be increasingly more important for locals to have an increased toolkit as just overall competition for the state capital budget and state infrastructure projects and dollars continues to be, it's just getting tighter. Some of that's a function of just the percentage of the capital budget that goes to schools, and just some of it's a function of what's available and the cost to do things. So huge, a very significant piece of legislation, and that should have pay dividends for you and your community. There was also some good news to be seen in the Public Works Assistance Account. It's the largest allocation in the last 10 years. We had an emphasis on broadband. I think there's two lenses really to look at broadband access. One of it is perhaps the more commonly just fiber in the ground, or providing access to a house. I think the other way to look at it is also affordability. With the kind of the average provider hovering around $100 a month to provide high-speed internet, with what we found in COVID, where we think that that it's not a luxury and it's an essential utility. Looking at how we think about providing high quality, high speed internet to all the residents of College Place is something critical, and working with agencies to figure out, there are quite a bit of resources available, and how does that get funded in ways that make an impact on the city. The coalition broadly did very well last session finding within the specific capital budget appropriations for projects of regional significance. This year, unlike some other years, there wasn't anything that I would say was specifically for the city of College Place, although we could argue that by receiving state funding for Mill Creek flood control channel, that possibly ameliorated certain impacts to your residents within the area. But largely for the coalition broadly, it was a very successful capital budget session. And we'll talk more about some of the projects in your area and kind of the plan moving forward in some later slides. And then lastly, there was budget enhancements all over the place. I think if there's specific questions, I can go into them. I think largely kind of what I want to highlight is just there's a lot of new resources being made available either through the original CARES Act or through ARPA that some of it's still getting sorted, and it's some of it is our state agencies have been somewhat overwhelmed by the amount of work and the programs and rules and policies, and then some of it's just to be determined as the Infrastructure Act is still kind of moving its way out of the Senate and into this House and into deliberations around there. But as I think you've got one of the best city manager administrators in the state, and he's working very diligently to make sure that your budget priorities are scrubbed as many times as possible to see what is available out there. This was pretty disappointing, although perhaps in some ways not surprising, that there was not a Senate transportation package. I'll focus on the good. I'll focus on the good is that within various proposals that were out there, phase 8 readiness, and so moving forward with completion of phase 7 and doing then environmental and right of way for phase 8 of US 12 was funded in the proposals that are out there, as well as the Clinton interchange. So I think that's progress, and we're well positioned. I think it's fair to be disappointed that a transportation revenue package was not agreed upon last year. And this gets back to some of the comments Mr. Rizzatello said in the opening. So this is a supplemental year, unlike a what is referred to as like the biennial year. It's only 60 days of session, and that's 60 calendar days. So once the clock starts, it doesn't stop till the end. So there's just fewer days to figure it out. It's also comes into a revenue cycle, or I'm sorry, an election cycle, which makes revenue votes harder to do. So everyone in the House is up next year in November. It's harder for House members to take a big revenue vote right before an election, and then a large, a third of the Senate is up as well. So it is more difficult, both just from a function of fewer days, smaller funnel, and also from that election cycle piece. So that's one of the reasons why, as we look forward to next session and the likelihood of a transportation package, we have some kind of, it's not impossible, but it's harder to get done before the election cycle usually. As I mentioned, there are quite a bit of federal resources for various projects. We have some time to spend them. They don't look like a traditional federal dollar in that it doesn't have the same match requirement. It does in some ways look like a traditional federal dollar in that it is one-time money. So, not operational, not operating dollars, but fewer rules, hopefully, and not the same type of match requirement. I think what's helpful conversation for kind of your legislative delegation and the types of conversations I've had so far is is just to make it as streamlined as possible. Some of the monies will flow directly through federal government programs, but a lot of the ARPA money is going through the state and then through a state agency. And one, we're hoping that the what's allowed by the U.S. Treasury will be mirrored by like agencies like Commerce and such, so that that it's not narrower, that it is as broad as federally possible. And then also in terms of documentation and kind of what's required from an auditing perspective, we hope that it is, although maintains the a high standard for public dollars, isn't overly onerous, if that makes sense. So don't make it harder, don't make it less restrictive. There's a lot of money out there. Let's figure out how to best serve our communities and get it spent by December 24th. Is kind of the December of 2024 is kind of the big picture message. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of questions. I know your staff's working really hard. There's a webinar coming up on the 15th, hosted by the Association of Washington Cities. I'll make sure Mike has that link. Your staff is certainly welcome to participate. You are certainly welcome to participate. It's there'll be some other city administrators, some folks from state agencies like Commerce to kind of talk about, you know, what is available, what is practicable, and how you can build these potential revenue streams into some of your infrastructure and program goals moving forward. So here are some items then that were on our agenda last year on the City of College Places agenda that are were unfinished. There's been a growth. I'm trying to think about how to characterize this appropriately. I think growing feels like the right word. Sometimes when you're working on legislation, it feels like the tide, and you hope the tide is coming in. And I feel a little bit like that on small city inclusion, on multifamily tax exemption. There historically has been some reservation around the overall, not just small cities access, but large cities, medium cities, urban, rural, on multifamily tax exemption, and just feelings towards creating incentives for builders. I think a lot of that opposition is starting to be disabused of that notion, and I think there's a growing level of converts, particularly among the more progressive sides of the legislature, on what arguably is the supply side housing and just the need for more development and to use all tools. So that's something we're looking forward to moving forward. I am cautiously optimistic, although again, within the confines of a short session, it's everything's difficult. We are looking at reauthorizing the rural tax credit. I honestly thought that bill was a done deal last year. We made it out of the House. It was a House bill, 1333, with a near unanimous vote. We made it very far in the Senate, and then it did not get beyond Senate Ways and Means, and essentially there was one, the chair didn't like it. Now, we had a year to play with, I guess, is the way I would say it. And so sometimes if you are horse trading legislation and you're stuck and you're a place where you really need to apply some like some leverage was going on with this bill. And at some point when you have a year left, you don't necessarily allow yourself to get leveraged, or you don't necessarily, use your leverage on that. So I believe that is a little bit of the story that happened, and I am hoping that we can get that passed this year, because that is the authority that's available, that funds a lot of the EDA grants and programs. And from conversations I've had with Mr. Rizzatello, I know that City of College Place has been the beneficiary of some of those in the existing cycle, and so to have it reauthorized for another 25 years would be a good thing. I'm going to put a pin in police reform for just a second. it's on our agenda. It's something we've been striving for year after year for structural change of property tax. I'm not specifically optimistic, but we shall see. I think there's going to be a lot of work circling back to kind of that housing conversation and supply side housing around zoning with respect to local control and unfunded mandates. And depending on how you want to parse that, I think the financial situation with the budget is going to be good enough that I don't think we're going to get jammed with cuts to some of the shared revenue sources and things like that. But I do see continued work around planning requirements, around affordability. And what I'm hearing a lot this session, and I don't necessarily want to get in the arguments of whether this is an accurate statement or not, but this is what I'm hearing, and I'm sharing that to you, is that one of the single biggest issues around housing supply is exclusionary zoning by municipalities. Now, again, I don't necessarily believe in the veracity of that statement, but I'm being told that by influential people in both the House and the Senate. And so I expect legislation that looks at preempting local control around zoning and adding requirements in planning and around a comp plan and GMA and other elements on low income and extremely low income housing. And so I do believe that will be a very significant issue that we will have to, really work hard against. With respect to police reform clarity, I think most folks are kind of aware, but long and short of it is the legislature last session in House Bill 1310 passed some what they believe was intended to be limits of physical force as it pertains to responding to potential criminal activity. That legislation has been open to interpretation and has caused a lot of uncertainty in our law enforcement community statewide and locally. And there is a desire to have some more clarity as it applies to when you respond to crisis. So the language in that bill talks about things like reasonable suspicion and probable cause, and those are legal terms and they apply to criminal activity. They do not translate to when you're responding to a crisis call and there is an individual that is in crisis and is potentially either dangerous to self or others. So I expect there to be a lot of work on that issue. I do not expect it to be easy because there isn't necessarily an easy translation from the criminal side of the ledger to the civil side. And so that is going to be kind of a difficult needle to thread. Quite frankly, it wasn't a very participatory process last year in a virtual environment. There was a lot of policy that was passed that, from my assessment, was worked in kind of a cloistered environment, and we're seeing some of that thing. So I flagged use of force. I think one of the very simple things that would have been addressed and caught in a more collaborative process and a more open process last year would have been the beanbag issue. Essentially, the legislature, in wanting to limit what they believe is the use of military weapons by local police, they set a size limit or a caliber limit, but it had the unintended consequence of making it, of not allowing local law enforcement to use non-lethal things such as beanbags for crowd dispersement. So that is going to get fixed, I think, and it's going to be easy to get fixed. The clarity around what are the roles, responsibilities, and tools available to local law enforcement officers when responding to civil cases is going to be harder. And I'm not sure the clarity we receive will be. I'm worried. I'm nervous. This is a very I'm careful around this language, and I'm nonpartisan. I work in a nonpartisan faculty, but this is what could be viewed through a historical lens. It's a pretty progressive legislature, and they had an approach to police reform that was very much focused on policy and certain policy um, ideals, and not perhaps maybe as focused on how those ideals get implemented in the community, is how I'll say that. We need to finish the job on transportation package. I'm still worried that it's going to be a little bit hard given the short session and election cycle. If we take an 18-month horizon and say, does it get done? Not this session, but the next section after, yes, I'm very optimistic. How does that line up then with whatever federal package or not? Hard to say, but I think that's probably a more realistic viewpoint on when we see new revenue for a transportation package. Specifically around capital budget, I think that there is a need for kind of a multi-biennium strategy on how we get state assistance for the wastewater treatment plant. There is some conversations that Mr. Rizzatello and I will be engaged in with the other members of the local government coalition to talk about how we prioritize College Place's need and kind of where we are in terms of historically what projects have been prioritized and why, and why this project is one that ought to kind of in that conversation ought to rank very highly. There are some other opportunities maybe in a smaller session, and that we will look at receiving funding for too, including but not limited Lions Park, the decant facility, and then also some work around Southwest College Place. I've said a lot in the last few minutes, but I know you're on a tight time schedule. I'm certainly, I have no back end here, so I'm happy to kind of answer any questions about just big picture items next year, and also then some of the specifics I've talked about.
All right, thank you, Brian. Councilmember Peterson has his hand raised.
Brian, this is a blast from the past, but 18 months ago, well, maybe longer than that, time flies when we're having fun, but the Iman initiative, the sky was falling here, a while ago, as far as transportation dollars. I understand, and I've kept up with the, I think it was an October ruling or whatnot, where that I'm guessing was thrown out. What are your thoughts on it? Is that canceling of that baked in and it looks stable into the near future, or what are your thoughts on the status of the card tabs and the catastrophic impact that may have had on some dollars for transportation?
Sure. So you're correct. So there was a fairly significant hole to both state revenue projections and projects funded from that, and then project and programs, quite frankly, as well as locals that had authorized car tab TBDs versus sales tax. No, not property tax. But I don't want to get bogged down on that. But so for the time, and so they did what I would say is a one-time fix on basically what was referred to as the float, which is when you're managing a large account, quite frankly, right? A transportation budget of what's going to get done, when it's going to get done, is it going to get done this 6 months or next month? It's usually build in a little bit of reserve, and they access that to the tune of several $100 million for a one-time fix, betting on either having a transportation revenue package in the following year or having the courts throw that out. And the courts did throw that out. So I would say, like, specifically to that issue, that hole then no longer exists, and on a current law, budget and operating and spending plan, they're funded, and that there's no crisis. There's not a lot of wiggle room because I think um, the cost of doing construction and some other things has gone up. But with the influx of federal resources on the infrastructure side, on the capital and culvert side specifically, that freed up some room. And then I think they're still banking on a lot of federal dollars being available. So I don't think the sky is falling in the transportation, but I don't think there's a ton of money for new projects. If that makes sense, or if that's helpful.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Brian.
Councilmember Selby, you're next.
Thank you. I have, I guess, comments on the police bill, which obviously the one that passed last time and needs some fixes. One of the things that I keep hearing from constituents and others that they're really concerned about, and I share their concern, is mental health resources. And it seems to me that it would be a good thing to try to set up a mental health funding study group this coming out of this session, because we obviously can't, I don't expect that we would get a whole bunch of extra money this session, but we need a permanent funding source for mental health. And I mean, I don't know what it should be, but I think there should be one. And it may be helpful in negotiating that bill if, the mental health study bill is kind of combined with that, or, is a way to alleviate some people's concerns with changing that bill. Does that make sense?
It does. And by way of context, there was several moving pieces last year, including what was referred to as like the Blake bill, which addressed the Supreme Court decision around knowing possession, and also the suicide crisis hotline bill, as well as some other pieces. But specifically, I would say that it is this legislature's intent, and I'm not talking about your individual members, but just the leadership of the House and the Senate as articulated in their policy bills that they passed, that that we no longer have a criminal justice response to the substance abuse disorder side of behavioral health. And I would say that there's a large faction of the legislature that would also not want to have a criminal justice response to a mental health crisis as well. So drug possession, like if you are found in possession of narcotics, it's not really a crime. It's a misdemeanor, but it's only a misdemeanor after you've been deferred to treatment a couple times. So what does that mean? And I think that's a similar approach that they'd like to see, is a treatment base. They know that they don't have the infrastructure in place. They included around $50 million of funding for the development of forensic navigators, is what they're calling them. I think traditionally you would call them designated crisis responders. My kids are about to walk in the door, and my lovely dog Honey might make some noise. So I've asked them to take the dog outside. We'll see how that goes. But the truth of the situation is the infrastructure isn't in place. You're right. And $50 million sounds like a lot, perhaps for maybe some of the public that's watching this, but a statewide system, it's just not that much. And it's one thing to say, we're going to fund individuals to come out that are not law enforcement, but are masters of social work, and help people navigate a system of treatment. It's another thing to say, we have treatment beds available in your community for an individual in crisis to go to. And I think that's really what you're driving at as well, is how do we really have
Exactly. Both treatment beds and outpatient care. Working in higher education, it's been a concern for a while. And now with the trauma from COVID, that it's just really ramped up, that we can usually find immediate, suicide response or something. But then it's like, okay, we have a counselor that can see you in 6 weeks. Or there might be a bed in Western Washington in 12 weeks. It's not okay what we have
Yeah.
right now.
It's even harder for kids too, right? It's like, is there a spot at sundown or not? And
Yeah.
it's really hard.
I did have one other comment that I just kind of wanted to put a pin in, and this is more for Mike, actually. I keep seeing there's a fair amount of funding, et cetera, for small business. And I can't remember the name of the program right now where they train people to run small businesses well. I'm wondering if we might want to up our scholarships to that. So that's for a future thing, but it just wanted to put a pin in it so I don't forget. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to go through real quick through the other council members, just in case you have a question or comment. Councilmember Bobbitt.
Yes, thank you, Brian, for sharing with us. I do have a concern about the police reform clarity. I feel right now some of this stuff is I think putting our police at risk. Thank you.
I think that's a commonly held sentiment. I appreciate it. I maybe perhaps neglected to say another area that I think we'll work on is the what's colloquially referred to as a Terry stop. But the long and short of it is when an officer encounters an individual, like what can that officer do to ensure that that individual does not have like a weapon or something on them, and how do we ensure that that exchange is safe? And I do anticipate the legislature debating that issue thoroughly and how it relates to the context of what they passed.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cleveland.
No questions, but thank you for your presentation. It's very informative.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sherman.
Oh, I guess Lauren and Melody already went. I was ready to keep waiting. Thank you, Brian. That was really informational. I have questions on unemployment insurance and more for employers in town and even for the company that I work for, and how everyone will be potentially dinged. I know that I haven't found like a lot of information on how much really we're responsible for, or other employers are when they had to put people to furlough employees. I work in an industry that's still basically shut down. And so there's not, much to go from, but I also know that anybody in Olympia that you call is still navigating it themselves. So it's been a tricky situation for a long time. And I know that other industries are hurting as well. And so I don't know, I'm appreciative for the information, and I might just reach out to you later. And
Great. Well, for the relatively small window that where like travel was encouraged and felt free and good this summer. Every community I went to from the business community, one of the things I heard was, the single biggest restrictor or governor on the economy at the moment was the additional unemployment dollars being provided from the federal government and the unavailability of workforce, quite frankly. I'll be interested to see, now that we've come and gone from September 4th and that's lapsed, how that kind of translates. I'm seeing locally Taco Time was advertising $22 an hour to find someone to try to work. So I'll be interested to see, and I know so that was the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, and I'll circle back with Mike, there, and I know in my end of session presentation, there was an early action bill last year that did rate adjustments on the UI side for businesses for I guess perhaps the first year of COVID. It sounds like what you're saying is
It continues.
wanting some clarity on how that translates through, and some help on having rates adjusted for COVID existence for 2022 as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like it continues, and I'm in life performing arts, so even every time we want to start, we can't, and so we have people that we want to keep bringing back. We try to, then that has to stop, and so yeah, where does that leave us? So, thanks.
I have a lot of compassion for you. It's not
Thank you.
an easy challenge.
It's not been great.
Councilmember Boyle.
No questions, thank you, but I appreciate all the information that you've been able to put together and give to us.
Great, thank you.
All right, any last questions for Brian before we let him off the hook? No. Thank you so much, Brian. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really appreciate time, and it was a lively group today, which is fun for me. So, and I'm sure Mike and I and we'll be in touch as we kind of sharpen our pencils and fine tune the legislative agenda moving forward.
Great, thank you. Have a very good evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Oh, goodness. Okay, let's go on to the fiscal year 2022 budget calendar. And Mr. Carlton's going to be presenting on that.
Yep, I'll share my screen here. Says I cannot share screen while others are participating and sharing. Lisa, are you going to bring up the document?
I just gave you the rights to share. I just wasn't fast enough.
Oh. Everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, well, here we go again for another budget year 2022. We've started the process, but Mike asked me to share with council where we're at on our schedule and different timings of certain things. I won't go through every single line item. I'll just highlight some of the ones that really impact council. Where we stand currently is Mike has sent out the capital budgets to all department heads and asked for submission by last Friday. So we'll be combining that and looking at it. I would say right now I'm probably about maybe 5 days behind in where we're at, but we should be able to catch up given the time frame. Currently, it stands that the department heads should have got their budgeted narratives. You know, they had till the 10th, which is the end of the week, to get those submitted. We'll be out, I think, maybe till the following week to get those all submitted. A little late on getting Questica. Again, this is our second year using Questica. So all the department heads will be going into Questica and loading their budget information starting probably at the end of this week. I'm working on the revenues budget, getting the spreadsheets and templates updated with the information, and we should have those done as well by the end of the next week. We're required by RCW by the fourth Monday in September to have all of our estimates completed, and we should be on target for that. Some other meetings where we'll be meeting with individual department heads down, by the 20th to 24th of September, and I will be on track to meet that deadline. The first important date for everybody in council will be doing a workshop on the first workshop meeting in October, which is just a month away. So we'll be working hard to get everything ready for that meeting. After that, we have our our first proposed preliminary budget setting for the 12th of October, and we'll get that prepared and ready to go. We'll have a public hearing, as it states on the council meeting on the 26th of October. Any changes that have occurred in between there will be reflected in the budget for that meeting. We'll also do a property tax levy hearing at that meeting on October 26th. And then various other, we'll finalize the CIP, we'll get the budget prepared. The mayor will work on the budget message from the 27th to 29th of October. And then we'll work on preparing that preliminary budget that has to be completed 60 days before the ensuing fiscal year. That's the budget, preliminary budget, and the budget message. Then we'll go on. We'll have the setting of the property tax levies. We'll go to council on that first meeting in November, which is only a couple months away. It's going fast. After that, we'll have another hearing on the budget. We're required to have 2 hearings in the year, and that'll be on the 23rd of November. And we'll make copies of the proposed budget. It will be available public on the 21st. And that must be presented no later than 6 weeks before January 1st. We'll have a budget review with the finance committee will take place in a meeting. I have it listed as December 9th, but that's open for movement depending on everybody's schedule. Then we'll have our final hearing on the proposed budget will take place in council on December 14th. And then the next council at that same council meeting, we'll ask for adoption of the budget. And then we'll get the budget books completed and everything. And once it's approved, we'll get it all completed and submitted to various entities, SAO's office, MRSC, etc. So that's where we stand. Is there any questions?
All right, council members, let's see if there's any questions. Mr. Bobbitt?
Yeah, I assume it's a typo, but adoption of budget for 2020. That last row.
Thank you.
I said it's just a typo.
Yeah,
it looks good. Thank you so much, Brian, for all your hard work.
Mr. Cleveland?
Catch.
No questions, but thank you for the overview. Hopefully things proceed smoothly.
Mr. Peterson?
3 quick questions. Yeah, I'm sorry. Will this next budget cycle have any analysis of rate structures or schedules, or are we caught up on that, Brian, as far as reviewing the funding for, I guess I would do the water and whatnot, sewage? I think I believe we looked at that last year. Wasn't that correct? Or
yes, we redid the utility rate models last year, and those good for 3 years.
3 years. Okay, great. You did a fantastic presentation on the source of funding, and I'll call it chart of accounts. That PowerPoint, was that sent out, or did I miss that?
Well, it would be in the agenda package for that.
Oh, you're right. Okay, I'll go.
I could send it to you.
I'm lazy. If you could do that, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Third question: is there any way, and this is too early, and this is not a discussion for this is like a 30-second discussion, but is there any way that we can entertain or look at recycling again in this budget? I see where there's some communities that are starting to ramp up again, and I don't know if this is something we even want to go and look under that rock or not, but even if there's I don't know, what would it be, even if there's a source of city funding to offset it, some of it, or just restrict it to, I don't know if that's something, and maybe Mike, you want to chime in on this. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I know the markets have opened up a tiny bit, still not enough to offset that 0.99 percent cleanliness rule that China, Vietnam, and those other countries have. I can talk about our provider base and disposal. I mean, definitely based on previous discussions I've had with them, it would be much more restrictive than it was. So
Yeah,
it would be like it'd be like going back in the 90s when you used to separate the stuff in the trucks. And then likely it would cost quite a bit more because you're also cutting down on the amount of stuff you're sending out because of the quality it's required. So those are just the two things to keep in mind, but I can definitely connect with Derek and see what we can do.
Yeah, just real quickly. As I drive to Tri-Cities and I noticed over there at the pulp plant, it's interesting how the cardboard, it seems that there's been some revitalization of, but that may be coming from Michigan or something. I don't know. So yeah, okay. All right. Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brian.
Councilmember Selby.
Thank you, Brian, for keeping us organized on the budget. It looks great. I would just like to follow up on the recycling and add a question to Councilmember Peterson's questions. I've been taking cardboard, tin cans, and aluminum cans out to the recycling plant on 13th, and I've noticed that they have now a white paper collection, and I would like to know, is that actually getting recycled these days? Because I have to admit, at work especially, I generate a lot of white paper. So as you talk to them, that's something that, I think would be nice to know for those of us who are, hauling it out there.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I'll come right back to you, Councilmember Bobbitt. I'm going to just go quickly through the others. Councilmember Sherman.
I don't have any questions. The schedule looks good. Thanks, Brian.
Councilmember Boyle.
No questions. Looks really good, Brian.
All right, Councilmember Bobbitt.
Yes, think I'm with Lauren, revisiting recycling, but it's very frustrating, that the federal government, is still encouraging us to recycle, yet we have no place to take it here in College Place, Walla Walla. And I understand, the world economy kind of affects this, but isn't there any kind of recycling here in the United States? Why is everything sent to China? And it seems like there is a way to recycle some of our number 1 and number 2 plastics that they've stopped taking.
Well, I mean, I'll just address it today. For West Coast, most everything was going over to China and Vietnam. And since that time, if it doesn't reach that 0.999%, which nothing does, it then goes to a landfill in Arlington. The only area where they were able to do some stuff with it, but it's so inundated they aren't taking other areas, is Spokane. They burn it. They actually burn some recyclable materials, and they have like a waste to energy plant out in the West Plains. But they have so much material in Spokane Metro that they only have that opened up to areas outside the immediate vicinity. But I can definitely talk with Derek if there's some movement on some of the other areas where hopefully we could get something going again.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions regarding the budget? Or the budget calendar? All right. Thank you so much, Brian.
You're welcome.
Up next is Mr. McAndrews is going to report on the low water pressure issue that happened on August 29th.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to give a little bit of a debriefing on what happened. I guess it was last weekend. I think probably most of you realized there was some low water pressure early Sunday morning until we got things resolved. So it all pretty much stemmed from the power outage that happened the previous day on Saturday, the 28th. From what we can tell, the backup generator didn't run, but unfortunately, we don't have any errors or alarms or anything, and we've been unable to duplicate that issue. We've tested it over and over again, and everything works perfect every time, which is good. So we're not really sure why it didn't go that particular day, but because it didn't run, the controls for the water system stayed on the uninterruptible power supply, the UPS, until those batteries died. And at that point, the UPS has stayed off, and so the controls weren't able to communicate. So because the controls weren't communicating, they didn't notify staff that we had an issue. And that kind of stemmed because the part of the network, what turns out we discovered after the fact, there's a switch, a network switch that wasn't connected to the UPS. So regardless, those controls were trying to send alerts to staff for about 7 hours before it had ran through its cycle as many times as it was programmed to and stopped. And that's about the time we discovered the issue anyway. But so while that was happening, our wells weren't running, our tanks were being used, the water was being used, so our tanks were running down on water. And simultaneously, the east side booster station, all the pumps were running and there wasn't any water. So we had a little bit of damage to some seals, which we've repaired since. But fortunately, all those pumps are fully functional, up and running. So yeah, Public Works staff noticed first thing about 7 o'clock Sunday morning that there was low pressure. They responded, discovered, the issues that were going on. We're able to reset controls, manually turned on the wells, turned up our chlorine treatment so that make sure the water stayed safe. We've since taken samples and ran those, and everything came back clear, so that was good. So yeah, that's kind of how we addressed it the day of. And then we've since had Western States, who's the CAT rep, come in and troubleshoot our generator and our automatic transfer switch. And both are fully functional. Everything seems to be working. We've ran a bunch of tests to try to recreate the problem. But again, every time the generators kicked on and we've had full power, everything's worked. We've replaced 2 of the UPSs that one of them was a little bit older, and another one, because it failed or because it ran the batteries down, we decided to replace it, and we upsized those so they'll run longer in the future. We ordered a cellular auto dialer, which is actually a pretty cool thing. So it will monitor the system and it will communicate separately if there's any other errors in the system. So it'll let us know if there's power lost, if there's issues with the panel or the controls, if any alarms go unacknowledged for a period of time. I think it's over an hour. If the computer goes down, and then on top of that, it routinely communicates with a cloud-based system that's off-site. So if that system sees there's not communication, meaning likely a cell signal went down or something, that cloud-based system will send us a notification. So we'll get an alert to go in and check and see what's going on. So it'll be real redundant alarm system. On top of that, we've kind of re-implemented some new staffing requirements that if power goes out, their staff or our on-call staff are supposed to physically respond to the site and physically check things to make sure that everything came back on, it's up and running, we don't have any issues that we're not aware of. We've reconfigured our generator exercise schedule, which is a weekly exercise schedule, but we've also set it up to run the transfer switch, so it'll switch the building over to power during work hours while staff are on site, so we can monitor that and make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do while we're here. And on top of that, RH2, who's our engineering firm that we use for a lot of the water controls, is working on implementing a low tank, low suction cutoff for the east side booster station, so that if it senses the tanks are low or that there's not enough suction, it'll kick those pumps off so that we don't burn anything out and do a bunch of damage. And then that can be manually overridden. So if we need those running, and we can go in and kick those back on. And then they're also working on some reconfiguration or finalizing configuration for well 4, our newest well over at Peppers Bridge Road, that will include defaulting the well pressure control if it loses communication. So if there's no communication, instead of just the well going off, it'll kick into a pressure sensor, and if there's low pressure, it'll run, but it'll run conservatively so it doesn't cause issues on the other side. So with all the adjustments that we've made and everything that we've done since that issue, we're very confident that we're not going to have another low water pressure issue in the future, and stay on top of it. So questions?
All right, thank you. We'll start with Councilmember Bobbit. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Problem.
Mr. Cleveland?
No questions. Sounds like you guys are pretty thorough.
Mr. Peterson?
You know, Robert, I was just sitting here thinking about this. I didn't even notice it. I think I slept through it, but I mean, obviously this affects our firefighting ability, correct?
Yes, it would, but if we had low pressure, that could potentially affect firefighting. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small window, and but it's interesting that it's not just the inconvenience of people getting ready in the morning and whatnot, but yeah, right. Anyway, yeah. Thank you for all that work on that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Councilmember Selby?
Thank you. I was going through my list of, so did you do this and this and this, and you basically hit them all. So, well, I mean, you more than hit them all. I shouldn't say basically, like totally you didn't. So good job.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, we don't have any evidence that there was any sort of cross-contamination from the low pressure, but you did the.
Correct. Just to be on the safe side, immediately we kicked up our treatment levels.
Right.
And then we took sampling and ran those. And I believe Dennis, he's going to do more sampling this week. If he didn't already start it today, he's going to run another set of samples. So everything we've gotten so far came back as passing, and the water quality's good. I know some folks reported dirty water and obviously the low pressure when all of that happened. And what that is, there's all the minerals in our tanks, and as the tanks drain, it kind of essentially flushes out the system. And so people were seeing that in the toilet bowls and things. But now we're all filled back up with fresh water, and I haven't heard any reports of any ongoing issues. So
great. Well, if this was going to happen, it seems like a good time for it to happen, if there is such a thing.
I guess so.
Councilmember Sherman?
Thank you so much for the update. It felt so
going in and out, Heather. We can't really hear you. Now you're out. And you're frozen. So we'll come back to her. We'll see if she can get reconnected. And so we'll go on to Councilmember Boyle.
I don't have any questions, but I just have to applaud you guys for how quickly you guys were able to, see that there was an issue and get it taken care of, because it seemed like as soon as, I know in my home, we noticed it and I went on Facebook and saw that there was an issue, and then the next time I refreshed, it's taken care of, and it's like, great.
Yeah, our staff were quick on the spot and got in and handled it right away. So
yeah,
I'm
great job.
Thank you.
Well, and I would like to commend as well, because it was not fun for anybody, but especially the public works staff having to go out on a Sunday morning that early, of all days that you think you're going to get to sleep in or take your time getting ready and getting out of the house, that was not for them.
Sure.
So appreciated that they were all, not so much that they're willing, but they do it, right? But they had to, and none of them complained. So they did a great job on that.
Thank you.
So thank you all. Okay, so we're going to move on. If Heather comes back up and has a question, we'll pull you back in, Robert.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, the draft of the local road safety plan and ADA transition plan, and that's going to be Mr. Izatello.
Okay, I'll introduce everyone with this. So with the city of our size and with some new regulations and requirements that came down from the State Department of Transportation, they now require you to have a local road safety plan in order to get grant funds. Otherwise, you can no longer get grant funds from them. So that's a pretty big deal. And then likewise for communities over 5,000 population, is now a requirement to have a ADA transition plan. So that's Americans with Disabilities Act plan. That's identify areas where the sidewalk ramps don't meet ADA standard. And in general, you have a procedure moving forward where you're going to prioritize improvements, both from a safety perspective with local road safety plan, and then from the sidewalk ramp perspective with the ADA transition plan. So with that, earlier in the year, we were very lucky. We hired a great intern, Aquia, to work on these plans. And then Andrea over at the Walla Valley Metropolitan Planning Organization collaborated with us to begin work on both of these plans. The local road safety plan is pretty near completion. And then the ADA transition plan, we're actually working, going to be working with an advisory body of community members to figure out the prioritization and sift through survey responses that were conducted online. So with that, I will turn it over to Aquia and Andrea. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Mike. Can I please get control for the plan? Oh.
Yes, you should be able to do it now.
Okay. Bear with me 1 second.
While Aquia is getting up the highlights of the local road safety plan, I'll just tack on to what Mike said. Again, my name is Andrea Beckner-Behringer. I work for the Walla Valley Metropolitan Planning Organization. Today's my last day, though. I was really, really glad to be able to work with Aquia on this, and we have gotten it to the almost final stage. But what we're presenting to you today are all of the highlights. So the entire analysis for this local road safety plan has been completed. And the only thing that is left to do is just to finish out the final report, which will include more text in addition to the maps and the tables that we are presenting to you this evening. The main purpose of the local road safety plan, as Mike said, is really to situate College Place in a position where the city becomes eligible for grant funding. Apart from that, it is, of course, a really useful exercise to look through 10 years worth of crash data and really figure out where the hotspots are, what intersections should be included in potential improvements, and just what kind of crashes there are to begin with. And so Aquia is scooting right down to the collision summary. Over the course of the last 10 years, we had requested information from WashDOT, who compiles all police reported crash records. And there we looked at 2011 through 2020, all of the records that pertained to the city limits of College Place. And as you can see, on average, there were about 73 crashes per year. And they're shown by different levels of severity, because just no apparent injuries or unknown is not as significant as those that ended up in a fatality or with suspected serious injuries. And so it was really important for us to show just what kind of crashes there are and how they differentiate themselves in terms of severity. And Aquia, you want to scoot on down to the next table that shows this in actual numbers?
Yeah, so we looked over 734 crashes, and as you can see, broke it down with fatal crashes, suspected injury, serious injury, minor injury, possible injury, and no apparent injury. And as you can see, the 10-year total and the average, there were a total of 2 crashes and then 6 serious injuries, which is a lot, to us because we don't want any injuries or fatalities in College Place.
And once all of the GIS analysis, the geographic information system analysis behind the data was conducted, because as you can imagine, stepping through over 700 crash records is very difficult. So putting them all on a map to see exactly what is happening within the system made it much clearer. And you can see that most of them are tied to intersections. Now, again, this is no weighting by severity, that this is just number of crashes, and you can already see several hotspots emerge from this data. Akuya is pointing those out. And of course, all of those are tied to the intersection. Now, what Akuya has also done is she weighted all of those based on the fatality and serious injury crashes, which here's a snapshot of those 2 fatality crashes, which resulted in 3 fatalities, and the serious injury crashes. Once that is figured into the locations, then you get a slightly different map, which is, of course, the weighted heat map. And there you can really see that we're looking at just a considerably smaller number of sites that have severe crashes, and that allowed us to really hone in on those locations, because the funding that Mike and I referred to earlier is really tied to fatality crashes and severe serious injury crashes.
So we broke it down by collision types and contributing factors, where you look at how, things, crashes happened. And you can see that over 30% of serious injuries were at an angle, as well as with parked cars. And then we had, over 15% with rear end crashes. So these types of collisions were some of the top collision types here in College Place. We also had contributing factors where a lot of drivers are very inattentive and distracted when they're driving, or they're not yielding to signals and signs, and they're speeding and driving under the influence. And so, unfortunately, these are all the contributing factors here in College Place.
So after this analysis of 734 crashes weighted by severity, and looking at the intersection crash locations by type and by contributing factor, we wanted to get the number of focal points down to a more manageable number based on the analysis that had been done up to that point. And these are really the intersections that rose to the top of those 734, either because there was an extremely large number of crashes overall, or there was the involvement of serious injuries and fatalities. And that is what then the subsequent analysis focused on. So kind of move down. These are, again, the locations that you just saw on the map. By total crash number, by fatalities, by serious injuries, and then also by weighted crash rates. And that is that essentially tells us here we have, based on the numbers of vehicles that either enter the intersection, we have an extraordinary number of crashes that really make this a very important location to look at. Not knowing yet what kind of crashes, in terms of collision type and what contributing factors contributed to this hotspot, it was important to really divvy this out, because not every collision type and not every contributing factor would respond in the same way to countermeasures. So it was really important to dig into the data, understand exactly what happens, and then be able to use this information to kind of draw conclusions on what kind of improvements would best work in this particular location.
Right, so based on the contributing factors and the collision types, these are the selected countermeasures. The top one would be converting it to a roundabout, as well as including intersection lightings, having a race-median approach, or a dilemma zone detection system, transverse rumble strips, and intersection markers or striping, all will contribute to reducing all of the crashes. We also
go ahead.
We also did an analysis on the segment locations. Same thing with the intersections, where we found these 9 segments which have high crash locations. And as you can see, we have 12 streets and 4 streets. All of these locations are very problematic. And so here you can see the segment with where it starts to where it ends, and then the length, and as well as the crash rates. And with this, we used the vehicles miles traveled, which helped calculate the crash rate.
And Akuya, if you could just stay on that page for a moment. If you look at those crash rates and you see 24 point something and 17 point something, you would not expect to find anything above 1.7. That is about average for our area. So you can see there are many segments that have a much higher crash rate than what you would expect to find.
And here are the collision types and the contributing factors for each segment. Again, with angle collisions being the top collision types, and then inattention and distracted drivers being the top contributing factors. And here are the countermeasures selected for each segment, or to pick from, where we would want to see a relocation or removal of objects, race median, right in, right out access, road diets, edgeline rumble strips, speed variable warnings, and then reflectors or delineators.
One specific focal point are especially vulnerable users, in this case, the pedestrians and bicycles, and we will also talk about students here in just a little bit. We really wanted to hone in on those crashes that also involved walkers and bikers, because those often end in higher severity crashes, just simply because they do not have the advantage of being surrounded by a whole bunch of metal that protects them. And so this map shows you where within those 10 years of data, pedestrians and bicycles were involved in the crashes. And these bicycle and pedestrian involved crashes require different countermeasures. So we wanted to raise awareness of what could be used, and just like before, include the lifespan, the anticipated crash reduction, and then also what it would cost to put those countermeasures in place. Federal funding eligibility was again important here as well, because a lot of these countermeasures are eligible for federal funding that can be accessed through the WSDOT or through the MPO.
All right, so with the local road safety plan, we also included a safe route to school component, which is pretty vital to the city and also a requirement as well. And basically, this is to help students walk or bike to school without any obstructions in their way, and also to encourage more walking as well, to help reduce any sort of health, like obesity and the risk of heart diseases as well. And so we looked at different schools, as you will see. The first one will be Davies Elementary School. So we first did a corner buffer, a sort of a non-traditional corner buffer, where we picked all the segments and the intersections of crashes surrounding that school, and then sort of looked at that zone, and then, yeah, so you can see it here. And then we specifically picked young drivers to highlight because they are a high priority risk road user, because even with the total crashes, they account for about, I think, like over 30% of crashes here in College Place. And so highlighting them will let us know and help us to pick countermeasures combating the crashes as well.
And to add on to what Akuya just said, we had originally run half a mile and a quarter mile buffer because you know that as long as children can walk within a mile to the school, they are not bused. But with the half a mile buffer, it essentially highlighted all of College Place and was really not helpful. Even the quarter mile buffer took in such a large area that the only way we could actually get to locations that could definitely benefit from improvements were those four corners. And in this case, it is a beautiful square. In as you will see from the other maps, it's not quite a square, but we wanted to capture all of the corner points because all of the students will have to come through one of those corner points. Again, half a mile buffer. It was the entire city, and of course, then it will tell you to improve every single intersection with all of these different countermeasures that are particularly conducive to students that walk and bike, and to those young drivers who frequent those areas as well.
Yep. So Davis here has again the crashes with 2 pedestrian crashes, which is quite significant. We grouped Walla Walla Valley Academy as well as Rogers Adventist School because they are in the same locations. And as you can see, here is a sort of non-square buffer, and again with 2 crashes, but again we have pretty significant young drivers here. We also have a very non-traditional buffer with John Seeger Middle School and College Place High School. And as you can see, with State Route intersection 125, we have a significant amount of young drivers coming in, as well as here with South College Avenue. And Walla Walla here takes the cake with all these crashes. You see 3 bicycle crash locations, as well as 2 pedestrian locations, and with all these young drivers involved with crashes as well.
So overall, rather than focusing on the crash rate itself, we wanted to highlight young driver involvement. And as you can see, it's almost a third, over a third, almost half, and then definitely over half of young driver involvement in the crashes on these corner points that surround the schools and the university. That is statistically significant. Just like before, inattention and distraction has a lot to do with it, especially with the young drivers. some unsafe speeds, and certainly disregard of traffic control and improper movements. Young drivers just simply do not have the experience to navigate the intersections yet, and they are represented at a much higher rate than other drivers in this case. With that in mind, the countermeasures that were specifically handpicked for school, safe routes to school locations are high visibility crosswalks, the separate bike lanes, also the intersection markings and stripings to avoid some of these angle crashes, speed warnings, because we did have some speeders that traverse rumble strips to alert them of the oncoming intersection, particularly right there by Highway 125, because it is a high-speed facility, and sometimes people don't recognize that they're approaching a traffic light on the highway and don't necessarily get to stop on time just simply because of the high speed they were traveling with. And then, of course, pedestrian, driver, and bicycle education. That is a very important part, just simply because we see some very interesting behavior on the road in terms of ignoring traffic control and traffic laws, going too fast for the situation, and cyclists, sidewalk, and driver education would certainly help with this.
All right, so that is it for the local road safety plan. Moving on to the ADA transition plan. As Mike mentioned already, it is crucial that any government agency with over 50 employees have a ADA transition plan, and as well as have a plan that's necessary to bring pedestrian facilities in the right of way. And so this is a little snippet of the survey that was being done, and we told others to, or people to tell them about themselves, and over about 50% said that they had, a disability or they supported somebody with a disability. We also asked if they have ever been, or if they have ever not, been able to move around the city, and over 59% said yes, meaning that they had trouble moving around the city. And so we want it to be, 100% no, that it's easy for them to move around the city. And also with that, it's very important because a lot of other cities have been sued because they didn't have a proper ADA compliant curb or sidewalk in place. So it's very crucial that we're able to have this plan put in place. All right, so the previous intern did a tremendous job in collecting almost like 80% of the data. And so with that, 269 document hazards were found, as well as 70 existing pedestrian features were also found. And so these things we're going to be looking at are curb ramps, sidewalks, as well as pedestrian push button. And so the first one will be curb ramps. And with these ones, there are a few things that need it to be ADA compliant. There has to be, the sidewalk has to be good. The curb ramp has a good condition. It has to have a contrasting variable warning detection. The slopes have to be less than a certain percentage, like 8%. There can't be any gaps or, discontinuities, coming onto the road or on the sidewalks. And there can't be any obstructions. So here on the left, we have one that is close to C Street, next to Burnabank. And here on the right, we have a bad compliance where we have, the curb ending and it's just, doesn't drop. We have a grate here that, is an obstruction as well as the fire hydrant. And so these are the examples of a good and bad curb ramp. Moving on to the sidewalk. For a sidewalk to be ADA compliant, it has to be more than 4 feet. It has to be in good condition. It can't have any obstructions, and it can't have any vertical gaps or displacement. And so here is one in North College Avenue, I believe. And then here's the other where you see vegetation sort of growing over the sidewalk, and you have this little gap here, which is very problematic and can cause people to fall. And so I believe that one is in South or 6th Street. And here are the signal push buttons. This is close to Walmart in South College Avenue and Lamperty Street. And here you can see that the push button has a vibro tactile button where it gives vibrating feedback. We have a direction arrow pointing to where the person can go. There's visual contrast. There's also an all-weather landing surface or pavement around the push button. The height is also good, around 42 inches. So this is a very good example of a push button. Here we have a pretty bad, okay example. This is also Walmart State Route 125 and Meadowbrook Street. And as you can see here, it's really bad. There's no sidewalk close by. There is a directional info, but there's no audible feedback or yeah, it's not good at all, and it can lead to a very bad, fall. And so here are curb ramps in College Place. There are a total of 604 curb ramps, with these areas being non-compliant. So basically there's a score-based system based on what I said before, based on the slope, the condition of the curb ramp, and all these things. And then they're sort of compiled together to have an overall curb ramp score. And so based on that, these are put together, and here's what you can see. And as you can see, we have a pretty good number of compliant curb ramps. But unfortunately, we also have a lot of areas where there are no curb ramps. And so that sort of sets us back as well. We also have here sidewalks. Obviously, the green is all the sidewalks available, and black are the ones where there aren't any sidewalks. I'm currently doing an analysis on the sidewalks and the compliance of it. And so with that, I will update you on which ones are compliant or, semi-compliant or not compliant at all. And here are the push buttons. As you can see, the one I showed you earlier with the Walmart intersection state routes, here are some of the non-compliant push buttons, and then we have other ones where they are compliant and semi-compliant. And there are a total of 7 to 8 signal push buttons in College Place. All right, so for prioritization, we are going to do a sort of, a thing where we're going to do an activity ranking and a severity ranking, and then we're going to have an overall barrier ranking. And so for the activity ranking, it would be the surveys and the online reporting tool, as well as the areas of attractions here in College Place. So things like this survey data where people stated that sidewalks were their #1 barrier here in College Place, something like that. And also what the public wants, to change, for example, parks and recreation spaces, schools, medical facilities, commercial areas, are top places that people want to be ADA compliant. So for severity ranking, this is from the city of Walla Walla's own ADA plan. And basically what it would be is there'll be a score based on a criteria that the feature does not have. So for example, with sidewalks, if the width is less than 4 feet, then a score will be applied to it. And if it has, it's in bad condition, a score will be applied to it and so forth. So the higher the score, the worse it's less compliant. And so then we'll have an overall ranking system. And so this was implemented in the city of Shoreline, Washington. And based on their committee, based on their goals, they came up with all this criterion. And so for us also, there has been a ad hoc subcommittee put in place where we'll be meeting next week actually to put together a criterion based on our goals and our values. And then based on that, we would have a criterion and then assign scores for the total overall compliance and what should be prioritized first. And so that is what I have for the ADA transition plan.
All right. Well, goodness, the bad was really bad, wasn't it? All right, let's go through council members for questions or comments. Councilmember Bobbitt,
No questions.
Councilmember Cleveland,
No questions, thanks.
Councilmember Peterson.
I guess 2 points. We inherited State Route 125. Did I get that right? Yeah. I mean, you can see the severity there, but that's a WashDOT area, and so obviously that's going to take coordination between us and the state. An area that we have no control over, basically, I would guess. But so that's something that'll be interesting. I know we've talked about lowering the speed limits on that state route as it goes through there all the way into Walla Walla. But last question for Mike. Mike, I guess a study like this kind of cuts both ways. It shows our shortcomings, but it also is I'm guessing a blueprint or a map to ask for funding to arrive at a ADA compliant perspective. Is that your thinking on that, Mike?
Well, yeah, this is the game plan to gather people's money, to be frank. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Selby.
Thank you. This is a lot of work and it's really excellent. And anything that plays into Mike's plans to get us other people's money is always great. I do have one comment that I have noticed more and more lately, that people are leaving the scooters or their bikes or whatever in ways that block the sidewalk. And so places, even where the infrastructure is correct, you still would be blocked. I saw one the other day that was exactly on the wheelchair ramp, horizontal, so that you could not go down it at all. And I just wanted to, stop and leave a note, what, you hate babies and grandmas? But anyway, I think it would be helpful for us to have a little bit of an education thing somehow. So as we think about our list of things that we're reminding people about, I think that might be one we might want to add.
Yeah.
Ms. Sherman. Oh, she didn't come back. Okay. Ms. Boyle.
This was some excellent information that you guys were able to put together. It was very, very fascinating for me to be able to see the actual numbers as far as the different age ranges of the drivers and with the incidents and things like that. I was surprised at the younger drivers around Davis, actually, since I just always equate that to parents being there and not so much the young drivers. So that was interesting to see for me. Is there, I wonder, was one of the elements I kept seeing in your guys' numbers, there was, for the causes and things, there was always an other column. Can you guys give me a couple of examples of what fell into those, the other, just so we know what else was kind of a compilation of in there?
Unfortunately, that is a catch-all. So whenever a police report is done on one of the crashes and it does not fit the usual, was texting while driving, not paying attention, going too fast, under the influence, and there are quite a few more of those that, you know, that come into play. If they were not captured in any of those usual contenders, or it is uncertain as to what exactly may have been a contributing factor, that is what is under others. So we have no additional information because the data was directly taken from the crash report itself, the collision report.
Got it. Okay. I kept on, well, you guys have such clear pieces in there. What, there's one, what's the one other? So that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? This was completely fascinating information. Thank you both. And Andrea, thank you for everything you've done for our communities. We are sorely going to lack your expertise, and it's beyond the MPO. It has truly been an honor working with you these past years. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We wish you the happiest in Oklahoma.
With my grandbabies, I'm a little excited about the grandbabies, but yes, I already cried today because I'm leaving. So it is sad and happy at the same time.
Well, you will be missed in many community meetings. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That was quite interesting. Okay, let's see. We're going to move on. The key infrastructure project drill down. Mike, you will be presenting on that?
Yeah, I'll just give you all the Cliff's notes on each project just because we have several big ones underway. If you have any questions, let myself know or the consulting project manager know, and we'll get it answered. So with the first one would be the Southwest Sewer, which is the largest one. I did a copy of the email from the project manager, and then there's also a map as well. This shows essentially what parts are done, what parts are not. So the gravity line between Teal and College Avenue has been installed. It's not in service yet. We're awaiting essentially the mechanical items. They actually start putting the nuts and bolts in the lift station. All that stuff is custom made. So we're basically at the beck and call of the mechanical manufacturer. And then the other big thing is College Avenue. So we did put the pipe up from where it meets with College Avenue south of the high school up to around like Cedar Bend. However, while we're doing this project, we have two culverts that go to Stone Creek that are not in compliance with the MPDES requirements. It's been in our stormwater plan for a while. So Department of Ecology and USDA is having us deal with that while we have the road all dug up. So that has led to delays because they insisted we get that done. So we had to keep the road closed at that northern end longer than we wanted to. But as you can see, we look at the email. It's been ordered, the stuff to do the stormwater. We have College Avenue repaved up until point of Cedar Bend for school. Traffic's being rerouted from State Route 125. That's the best we're able to do right now. And the main focus is going to be installation of lift station pumps, piping, getting the pressurized sewer up Teal. That's a very big one. And then getting the lift station building itself on Teal built, and then demo of the old lift station, which is actually underneath College Avenue, just south of Lamperti. So very big project, but we're making good headway on that. So that's that one. For well number 6, we actually have the bid on that out right now, out on the streets to get the well house constructed. They had several delays having tied to the fact that with Department of Health, they redid their manual for engineering, so it had to go through an additional review, whereas originally we thought we could go through a very quick approval since it's very similar plans of 4, the well 4. But it's out on the streets now. We believe we'll be able to award this bid in October. And then we believe as we get into summer, we will have that well at Whitman and Maple operational, which is good. Because as you know, we've struggled for years to get our water system where it used to be, because we had the 2 wells fail back right around the time I first got here. And then ever since that time, we've been trying to get a lot of grants, money, everything else to get us back up where we were at way back when. Lions Park, Anderson Perry is our consulting engineer there, and they are working on the geological work and just doing some preliminary park layout engineering. We're still awaiting the RCO grant agreements. It's just taken the state forever to get grant agreements done. So we are awaiting that, but we had local money budget for this, so we moved ahead on the engineering. And we also have Anderson Perry working on a grant application for the Lions Park Pond, just because I fear once we get into it, it may be additional funds than what we were estimating. So I want to make sure we have enough funds to cover everything. So we are doing a supplemental grant for the pond. And then the last thing is the 4 Bikes project. So Wall Wall Valley Blue Zones is actually doing a demonstration project with us end of this month, where they'll be using some equipment that'll be donated by Home Depot, and then the students at the university will help, and we'll be able to really get a sense of what that street will look like after the improvements are done. And there'll be a demonstration project for Blue Zones. 90% design is complete. The design for that was quite extensive just because we had to navigate around an electrical tunnel the university has underneath 4th Street. So that was a lot of fun. This will be scheduled to advertise in early spring. Our hope there is that we'll be able to get better bids because the bidding environment has been cutthroat, and the quotes and estimates for construction projects have been quite inflated. So we think getting this out in the very early spring, winter time will help quite a bit. But that is the updates on the key projects that are live at the moment.
All right, let's go through council members. Councilmember Bobbitt.
No questions.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thanks for the presentation. I was kind of curious, at one point we talked about a solar array. Is that thing pretty much paused and dead, or are we still looking for funding, or kind of where's that at?
So we ended up having a funding gap for the solar array because we requested Pacific Power Blue Sky money. We received a smaller amount, and then the solar market was quite volatile. So we put a minor pause on it. However, in that time, the state ended up allocating a bunch of ARPA money from the feds to a solar program. So we have submitted a solar grant to the State Department of Commerce. And then there is also a third-party solar agency. It's looking at putting solar installations like around the state, called TransAlta, where they help fund stuff. And we put in an application through them as well. So we are trying to push to make sure it happens. It's just that it's a little bit more of a delayed schedule, but I have faith it will happen. One of the changes we are going to do, though, is we're going to put the solar array inside the fence line of the water tanks, because for the power that the grid would produce from the solar array, it actually makes a lot more sense to connect it up with the tanks than the new well, because you have a repetitive load coming from the tanks, whereas from the well, you're revving it up and then down and up and down again. So you actually have to put inverter and a lot more costly equipment if you were to do it with the well. So actually doing it with the tanks is a lot more cost effective.
Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, Mike, the design work for Lions Park, is this the actual laying out of what will be there structurally, or am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so this is starting to lay out what's going to be there structurally, and this has been going through our park advisory boards. And then as they get further along, it's going to go through city council as well. And it's really bringing everything to life that's been in those conceptual plans that have been floating around the last 3 years.
So, hey, Mike, I've been down at the other park, Kiwanis, and enjoying the pickleball courts and stuff. Is there a consideration for pickleball courts at Lions, or not really?
That isn't what the survey showed with our park plan. It showed that pickleball was being addressed at Kiwanis, and that there was actually a request for either additional pickleball at Kiwanis or Veterans. What came through the survey for Lions Park was a request that the baseball field can be converted to a multi-use field that has a backstop on it. So the idea is to do that, and then also accommodate the splash pad and all of the other exercise equipment, which is going to take quite a bit of the footprint of that park.
Okay, so they looked at it. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Ms. Selby?
No questions. Good job, Mike.
Thanks.
Ms. Boyle?
Mike, I'm just curious, do we have a ballpark of when they think they're going to finish that strip of College Avenue by the high school?
That one has been difficult because of all the delays getting the equipment to put in that stormwater culvert. Then we have to order all these special filters and stuff. So I will say the goal is to try to get all of that in by November, but that is something we're working towards. Can't guarantee it. It's going to be based on when we get the raw materials, and even if we were to open that up, it likely would be shut down again soon thereafter, because keep in mind, once we get the new lift station going up on Teal Road, we actually have to demo that old lift station, which happens to be right under College Avenue. That wasn't put in the best location back in the day, and it's like in a little Quonset hut thing in a backyard, and then it goes right under College Avenue. So it's a lot more complex than it looks.
So get used to dropping them off behind Walmart.
Sadly, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions before we move on to the next item? All right. So thank you, Mike. We are going to move on to the Public Works Board Trust Fund Loan Construction Plans and Non-Construction List.
Yeah, and this is just to give an update to council where we're at with some of our grant and loan applications. And this was presented to Utilities Commission, and since that time, there's also a new one. So with Public Works Trust Fund, all 4 of our applications got funded. We're going to begin contracts to begin the engineering for another new well off of Teal, which is needed because keep in mind with the two new, I know we've been talking about new wells forever, but the problem is even when we get this well on Maple finally done, we're only back to where we were at like 5 years ago, yet we have an increase in population. So we do need an additional well. And we do have room for it on the 5 acres we bought a couple of years ago on Teal. So there's money there for that. Water main replacement, we put in a request for 617,000, just in case because of the fluctuations we saw in the market. And Sky Avenue really needs to be done, that area around Mountain View. So we have money to move forward on that. Also, wastewater lift station, and that's to do engineering in the replacement. You wouldn't really know this is a lift station, but if you walk on a sidewalk on Southwest First between Academy Way and Davis, there's this like coffee can contraption that sticks out in the middle of the sidewalk about 1.5 feet. I mean, you could pretty much trip on this thing, and it turns out it's actually a lift station that's undersized from back in the 60s. So we need to replace it. There's some vacant land across the street. So this would help with land acquisition and then replacing that lift station. It's desperately needed. Pre-construction, we did get funded to begin engineering on the elevated water tank and our water system plan. This went through this body. Showed the need for another tank specifically out in the western section of the community. And there is some land on the campus of the treatment plant up on top of the bluff where that would give very nice gravity to serve the stuff around like Mike and Craig's property along Majania and then even Martin Airfield to the north. So there's a concept around that. And then the fifth fiscal instrument is late last week, we received word that we ended up getting a fulfilled grant request for $364,000 in state CDBG funds to build sidewalk on the north side of 6th Street from College to Davis and then Southwest 8th from Bade to College. So that will move forward, and that was the application we put in a couple months ago.
All right. Let's go through any questions for anybody. Okay, Mr. Bobbitt.
No questions. Thank you, Mike.
Yep. Mr. Cleveland.
No questions.
All right. Mr. Peterson.
No questions. Thank you, Mike.
Ms. Selby.
No questions. Thank you.
Ms. Boyle.
No questions. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. All right, Mike, you saved the easiest for last. All right. Is there any other business for good of the order? Oh, Councilmember Peterson.
This is for Robert McAndrews.
Mm-hmm.
Are we having an issue in the morning with our sewer treatment plant odors?
I have not heard of anything. Why do you ask?
I've driven down Majania Road. Yeah. I've driven down Majania Road a couple times here early in the morning, heading south, right off of Lamperti. It could be something else going on. I don't know if they've got a natural gas main out there or something or whatnot that releases, but and I'm sure if there's an issue, people would be calling too. I mean, I get that, but just recently, we had an issue several years ago that was multiple times worse than this, but I'm pretty sure it has that kind of sewer treatment plant smell that's clear over on Majania, but I may be wrong too. So
I will reach out to Jacobs and see if they have been having any issues that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, and it may not be anything, we'll put it down to that, but it's been on multiple days spread out over 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah.
think you need a new route.
You're right. Or, yeah.
All
Yeah,
right,
yeah, let's not get personal here, okay?
Councilmember Bobbitt.
Yes, I'd like to see the invocation moment of silence move back into the agenda. It was skipped tonight. I'd like to at least see it after the call to order anyway.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other items? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn tonight?
So moved.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. If there's no objections, then the meeting is adjourned at 7:30 p.m. Thanks, everybody.